Hey all! We hope you're having a great week and enjoying all the content from our channel. Today I ran across a story that I somehow missed over the years. I've always watched true crime content both on TV as well as various online channels, and although I had heard this guy's nickname or moniker mentioned, I had never heard the full story. We have to warn you in advance, this one will be extremely disturbing and not for the faint of heart. Having said that, now on to this week's story at graveyarddance.com. Unfortunately for the woman of Oregon, Jerome Henry Brudos, or Jerry as he was called, was born on January the 31st of 1939 in Webster, South Dakota. Jerry was the youngest of two sons and had been an unwanted pregnancy. The Great Depression was in full swing and times were extremely hard to bring in more mouths to feed during this difficult time. Jerry's mom Eileen, who we don't have any photos of, was said to have become accepting of the pregnancy as long as she had a baby girl, so when Jerry came along and wasn't the girl she had hoped for, his mother was said to have become extremely abusive both physically, mentally and emotionally to the young boy. Whether that is true or not isn't known, or at least to what level of accuracy. What is known is that young Jerry was a loner who loved to play at the local junkyard by himself. One day while playing in an old vehicle at the tender age of just 5 years old, he found something in one of the old cars that would alter his life forever, a pair of women's high-heeled shoes. The shoes, according to Jerry, were sparkly and he was just in awe of them. Being a curious little kid who just found a shiny new toy, he took them home to play with them, not thinking anything was wrong. His mother though would beg to differ. When she walked in and found Jerry playing around wearing the shiny women's shoes, she flipped out and angrily demanded that he take the shoes back to the junkyard and throw them away. He didn't want to though. The more his mother threw a fit over them, the madder he got and more defiant he became. He decided to trick his mother. He acted like he was going to take them back, but somehow ended up sneaking them upstairs to his room. When she found out, she was quite pissed. She took the shoes out and burned them in a pile of burning trash while she angrily reprimanded the boy. It's really bizarre how she got so mad over him wearing women's shoes though, because other reports about his mother talked about her making Jerry wear little girls' clothing. Perhaps it was because of these shoes? Who knows? Either way, Jerry had two very bad issues brewing: a fascination with women's shoes because his mom had made a taboo, and now his hatred for her and soon all women. As the family moved around, they eventually settled in Salem, Oregon when Jerry was still a young boy. He enrolled in school there, and by the first grade, while most kids were having recess and playing outside on swings and playing games, Jerry was instead fascinated by his teacher's shoes. She liked to kick off her heels and leave them under his desk and walk around barefooted, which intrigued his growing fetish by the minute. When her shoes came up missing one day during class, a search found the shoes in Jerry's possessions, which made the teacher question him about why he had taken her shoes. The whole ordeal was nothing more than a child's shenanigans, but being questioned and embarrassed by the teacher just poured gasoline on an already growing fire of the hatred of women. Jerry was still very young, but his life was getting off to a very bad start. From then on, he began to steal the underwear and clothing of neighbor women who had hung their laundry out to dry. In those days, there wasn't as many electric appliances for washing and drying clothing. A lot of folks then still did it the old-fashioned way by washing by hand in a tub using a washboard, and they hung it out to naturally dry. Anywho, by the time he was a teenager, he was frequently in and out of mental hospitals. When Jerry was 17, he began to stalk women. He had even dug a hole out on the back of his parents' property where he had planned on creating a holding dungeon where he could keep his victims and inflict his own warped will on them. Luckily though, he was digging it by hand, which proved to be too much for him, so he simply gave up the idea. What he had to do though after was just as bad. He started walking up to women and knocking them out for their shoes. Yep, you heard that right. Was this kid screwed in the head or what? The lead had definitely broke off his pencil. Not only was he knocking them out and stealing their shoes, he was even stealing their underwear, where he was taking them home and keeping them as twisted little trophies. One of the girls he had stolen undies from was a teenage neighbor girl. He had taken her things off her clothing line, but they didn't know it was him yet. He had already started to escalate into madness, but he was about to take it a step further. He somehow convinced the girl that he had talked to the police and invited her over to discuss it. When she came over, he invited her into his family home and said he needed to go to the kitchen. And just a minute or two later, he popped out wearing a ski mask, wielding a knife, where they forced her to get naked and where he took photos of her. He left the room, and when he came back, he claimed that it wasn't him, that he had been locked in a room by the attacker, but the girl wasn't fooled. Neither was the police. Jerry was soon arrested and again placed in a psychiatric ward, where incredibly, they still allowed him to go to school during the day and report back to the hospital at night. The first assessment of him stated that he was a danger to society and would never be safe to be released. Later, so-called mental health experts said he was slightly schizophrenic but would be safely rehabilitated back into society, where they eventually released him. Needlessly to say, he was far from rehabilitated, just like so many other dangerous criminals that they release back into an unsuspecting society. I don't know about you, but it really pisses me off. They seriously need to start having a zero tolerance of guys like this. Moving on. By March of 1959, he joined the Air Force but didn't do very well. By October of the same year, he had went to a military doctor where he told them of his unhealthy obsessions and desires. They discharged him immediately. He was now 20 years old, living again with the mother who despised him. He soon met a local 17-year-old girl named Darcy Metzler. For some reason, Darcy actually fell in love with Jerry. Go figure. Her parents hated him and absolutely didn't want him dating their daughter, but after becoming pregnant, they reluctantly allowed the couple to be wed. Almost from the very start, Jerry became incredibly abusive and controlling of his new bride. She had to do exactly what he said, how he said, and when he said. One of the things he demanded was having her clean the home while nude, wearing nothing more than women's heels. Who saw that coming? Being controlling is bad, but forcing a woman to clean an entire house in high heels, have you ever tried wearing heels at work? That's cruel all in by itself. By her second child, she was growing tired of Jerry's controllingness and began to stand up to him. She began to say no to his sick requests. He then started spending more and more time in his basement, where he had completely locked off and forbidden his family to go. Just a side note here. If someone acts like this, he's most likely doing something sick or illegal. Get away. Far, far away, as quickly and as safely as you can. In her defense, she probably just figured he was down there putting deposits into the spank bank. She had already found photos laying around of him cross-dressing, which isn't seen as a big deal by today's standards, but in those days, it could have gotten you shunned from society or even arrested. She was just glad he was staying out of her hair. If she had only known just how sick Jerry Brudos was, she would have left immediately and never looked back. By 1967, feeling dejected by his wife, he was out walking in town and saw a woman wearing the kind of shoes that turned him on. Instead of going home though, he followed the woman home, where he waited for her to go to bed and fall asleep. Then he attacked her and strangled her while assaulting her. When he was done, he stole the woman's shoes and underwear and took them home. Thankfully though, his first major victim survived the attack, but his next victim wouldn't be so lucky. Linda Slauson was just barely 19 when she took a job as a door-to-door encyclopedia salesperson. Nowadays, most women wouldn't even think of going door-to-door, much less walking into a stranger's home to sell something, but the 60s was a much more innocent time. There was no ID channel or video channels online that talked about the various true crime cases. People back then didn't even think of such things. It was still thought to be safe to hitchhike or walk around at night. No one worried about being attacked, but sadly, that's what would happen to Linda. Jerry invited her in and made an excuse to walk down to the basement, where she followed because he said he was interested in buying some books from her. He wasn't. Once her back was turned, he struck her over the head with a blunt object, nearly killing her. He took advantage of the body, and after strangling her, he took a hacksaw and sawed off one of her feet so he could model his stolen shoe collection on it. Yeah. To say he crossed over into death penalty land by now would be an understatement. He kept the foot for quite some time and took the body and tied it to an old Ford transmission and threw it off the Willamette River Bridge. The murder of Linda Slauson happened on January 26 of 1960. Right when the attack began, his wife and children were upstairs. He had talked them into going out for dinner while he stayed home. For whatever reason though, he took roughly about 10 months before striking again. While out driving, he spotted a woman who was broke down on the side of the highway in November of that year. He told her he could fix her car, but he needed to go home to get tools. As they pulled into his drive, Jan Whitney, who was only 23, waited in the car for him to get his toolbox. She was probably thinking about how lucky she was that he had came along to save the day, but that's not what he had planned. He snuck up behind the car and jumped in the back door and choked her unconscious and took her into his shed, which was now where he was committing his crimes. He took her clothes off and took advantage of her while her hands were tied above her. If all this wasn't bad enough, he was walking around and snapping photos of her tied there naked. One of the ways he was later caught was he had accidentally taken a photo of her by a mirror with his own reflection in the photo. When he was done, instead of letting her go, he tied a noose around her neck and tied it to the engine chain hoist and started jacking it up, lifting her up several inches above the floor where she would die by hanging. While all of this was going on, he calmly walked back into the house and made a sandwich and talked with his family as if nothing was happening. When it was all over, he body too would be tied down and taken to the same bridge to be thrown away as if she had been nothing more than the daily garbage. Before doing so, he sliced off the poor girl's breast so he could try to make some weird casting of it. What an evil freak! On March 27th of '69, he attacked again. An 18-year-old girl named Karen Sprinker. He kidnapped her from a shopping store parking lot at gunpoint. He took her home and made her model all his stolen shoes and lingerie, and after taking several photos, he did exactly the same as he did to Jan, even down to the hanging and mutilation. He disposed her the same way as he did the others. Less than a month later, on April 17th, he tried unsuccessfully to kidnap 24-year-old Sharon Wood from a local parking garage. The very next day, he tried again to kidnap 15-year-old Gloria Smith the same way, who got away from him as well. His next victim, Linda Saley, who was just 22 years old, wouldn't be as lucky as the previous two. He kidnapped her from a local shopping parking lot where he brought her home and sexually assaulted her before killing her. He disposed of her body the same way he had all the others, by throwing her into the Willamette River over the bridge. By early spring of '69, a fisherman found the bodies of Saley and Sprinker, who had floated down to the Long Tom River. Jerry Brudos thought he was smarter than the police and could get away with anything, but he was about to find out otherwise. Police started asking around about suspicious men, and a local university student led them back to a man who was acting strange. She said that Jerry had given her his number and that he kept asking her out, but that she had very bad vibes about him. When they tried to contact him, he gave them a false number, which increased their interest in him. The more they questioned him, the more heat they turned up, and he eventually confessed everything in full. Ironically though, they didn't know this, but they almost could have had him after one of the other murders. Jerry had left one of the women hanging by the chain hoist in his shed and had locked it up and went on vacation with his wife and kids. While he was gone, a neighbor's car had crashed into the shed, which broke a few of the side boards of the building. Police came and looked at the damage, but didn't look close enough. If they would have just walked up and looked closer into the shed, they would have seen a woman's corpse hanging there. Either way, his gig was now up. Although he was guilty of 4 murders, he was convicted of only 3. He didn't keep photographic evidence of Linda's body the way he did the others, so for Jan Whitney, Karen Sprinker, and Gloria Smith, he got 3 life sentences. While in prison, he would send off for shoe catalogs and say that was his substitute for porn. He filed several appeals, even claiming something insanely bizarre. He claimed that the photo of him naked and one of the photos of him with a hanging victim had to be thrown out because it wasn't proven that he had murdered her. Okay, what? Is this dude for real? Thank God the Oregon prison system finally got it right and said that he would never leave prison alive. They were right. He died of liver cancer on March 28 of 2006 after serving 37 years. The longest in Oregon state history of any inmate. Good riddance. If you liked today's story, we hope you'll consider liking the video to help push us up the rankings and to help get us seen by a broader audience. Subscribing to our channel and our social links also play a huge role into helping us out. We thank each and everyone who takes the time to stop, watch and listen. Our merch shop is down below as well, where you can get a cool new t-shirt, mug or hoodie. Anywho, till next time y'all.